Hey, welcome to the video. So this is a walkthrough on how to make sourdough hearth bread. And if you're not familiar with hearth bread, it's a very soft, rustic type loaf that has a lot of different utility to it, and it's super easy to make. One of my favorite ways to use it is just as a side for my dinners, but you can make great sandwiches out of it. You can make, garlic cheesy bread, all sorts of stuff. It's a same day recipe. Very easy to make. Not a lot of tools are required. You really only need a food scale, a mixing bowl, and a baking sheet. And in this recipe, I'm going to walk you through how to make 2 loaves. And the reason why we're doing 2 is when you make this recipe for the first time, that first loaf goes by pretty quick, and you're going to be pretty thankful that you have a second one because this is a really good bread. So without further ado, let's get started. All right, so for this dough, it's actually pretty easy, and we don't need a whole lot of ingredients for it, and it's pretty low maintenance. So to start, we're going to zero out our scale and add 375 grams or milliliters of water to our bowl. And next, we're going to zero out our scale again and add 585 grams of flour. I'm using bread flour here. All right, now that we've got our flour in there, we're going to do a quick autolyse. And if you don't know what that is, all we're doing is we're mixing together this water and flour, and we're going to let it sit for about 30 minutes. And what that's going to do is help build some nice gluten strength before we add our other ingredients. So I'm using a silicone spatula, a jar spatula actually. And what I'm doing is I'm just very roughly mixing everything together. If you want to use your hands, you can, or if you have a stand mixer, that would work great too. And ultimately, what we're looking for here is just to get all the ingredients integrated together. The 2 ingredients, I should say, water and flour. So when you're done, it's going to look like a shaggy ball like this. And we're going to cover this and let it sit for about 30 minutes, and then we're going to add the rest of our ingredients. Okay, so it's been about 30 minutes. I'm going to take the cover off, and what you'll find is that after a quick autolyse, it has some gluten strength built up already just from simply sitting there, which is pretty cool. So we're going to add the rest of our ingredients. I'm going to start with 15 grams of sugar, 12 grams of salt, and the star of the show is my peaked sourdough starter. So I'm going to add 150 grams of my sourdough starter. And I had pre-measured out the salt and sugar, so I'm going to get out my scale here and pour out 150 grams of sourdough starter. All right, 154, close enough. Okay, so now what I'm going to do is take this off the scale, and I'm just going to wet my fingers a tiny bit, and I'm going to just work my hands through this dough. Now the goal here is just to get everything integrated together. Make sure all the sugar and salt and sourdough starter are able to mesh together with that initial dough that we made. And this is kind of a messy process if you're using your hands like I am. You can use, a spatula like I was doing before, or a hand mixer, whatever's easier for you. And ultimately, we just want to mix this until everything is well integrated together, which usually just takes like a minute or 2. All right. So now everything is mixed together pretty well, and that's it for the most part for this dough. Now we just have to wait for it to ferment. So I usually let it sit here for about an hour until I come through and do a stretch and fold. And so I'll walk through that. So I'm going to cover this dough, let it sit for about an hour. I started this dough in the morning. It's 8 a.m. when I started. It's about 8:30 now after the initial auto lease. So I'm going to come back at about 9:30 and do a stretch and fold on this dough. So I'll see you then. All right, so it's been about an hour. Our dough has had a chance to kind of settle into the bowl. Should look kind of like this, maybe a little bit rougher depending upon how much you mix it at the beginning, but it's going to be kind of spread out along the bottom of the bowl. And what we're going to do now is do some folds so that it helps build the gluten strength and just kind of helps further integrate stuff together. Now there's a couple ways to do this. You can do a stretch and fold, or you could do a coil fold, and I'll walk through both. Either one is fine. What I like to do when I do folds is just get my fingertips wet. So I had a little bowl of water to the side here, and I just got my fingertips damp. To do the stretch and fold, you just take one side, pull it up, and then fold it over itself like that. And then go to the other side, pull it up, and fold it over like that. And then you just do that a couple of times. To do a coil fold, what you do, some people find this to be easier. You just grab the dough and basically fold it onto itself. So you're grabbing the middle part and then just setting it back down in the bowl and folding it onto itself and kind of repeating that process. Now, you want to do your folds until the edge, the outer shell of the dough gets nice and smooth like this. And then once you've finished your fold, you just set it back in the bowl and put the lid on. Now, this is a pretty low maintenance dough. We're just going to do folding one more time, and then we're just going to let it sit and ferment until we're ready to move it to the baking sheet. So I'm going to let this sit for one more hour and then do another set of folds, and then we'll talk about the next steps then. All right, so it's been another hour, and I'm going to do my last folding session. This time I'm just going to do a coil fold, so I'm just going to grab it up. Again, you can do a stretch and fold if you want, doesn't really matter. And just do that a couple of times until it gets nice and smooth. And you can see here, we're already starting to, it's been about 2 hours. We have some gas bubbles popping up, just really small ones, but that gives us a good sign that it's fermenting all right. Now, we're going to want to let this sit here for another 1 to 3 hours. It really depends on, how cold or hot your house is and how strong your starter is. But typically what you'd want to look for before we move to the next stage is that there's like a 50% volume increase on your dough. And that's why these coil folds can help, because you're kind of constricting the dough into a tight ball, and you can get a better gauge of how much that's expanded when you look back at it. So you'd want about a 50% increase in volume, and then, signs of air bubbles. Once it gets to this next stage, we're going to divide it in two and then do a really lazy shaping session. So I don't like to get too crazy with the shaping with Hearth bread, just very simple. And I'll walk you through that process. But for now, I've done my last folding session, and I'm just going to let this sit here and ferment. For me, it's probably going to be about 2 hours. So I'll check back with you then. All right, so it's been about 4 hours total since I've added my sourdough starter. And what I've noticed when I came up to check on it was that it did increase in volume about 50%, and I can see some bubbles forming on the surface, which tells me that I'm ready for the next stage. And this can take a little longer, a little shorter, depending upon how hot or cold your house is. If it's the summertime, this whole process might happen a lot faster than if your house is, cold. So I'm going to take this out. It's not, at this point in time, It's gone through some fermentation, but it's not completely done yet. I want it to finish on this baking sheet I have next to me here. So I'm going to take it out as it is now and roughly shape it and put it onto the baking sheet and let it finish there. So to do that, I like to take a little bit of flour and just lightly flour the surface where I'm going to be working. Don't need too much. And I'm going to take out the dough. Just get my hands a little bit with a little bit of flour to make it easier to work with. And I'm going to weigh the bowl, or zero out the bowl, and then add the dough in there and figure out how much it weighs. So that just tells me how much I need to aim for each one. Now this is super imperfect, so this is going to be about 550 per loaf is what I'm aiming for. And to divide it into, I'm using a bench scraper, but you can use a knife just as well. So put this back in here. About 576, so a little higher than what I was hoping for, but that's okay. Doesn't have to be perfect. So now what I'm gonna do is move one of these loaves to the side, and I'm just gonna spread out this flour a tiny bit. The flour just makes it a little bit easier to work with, and what I like to do is just kind of plop it down and then flip it over. And what that allows me to do is roll it out more evenly. Now, if you don't have a roller, it's okay. You can just use your hands and pull it or flatten it out. But what I'm going for is kind of a rectangular shape. Ultimately, I'm going to be rolling this into a log, or shaping this into a log, I should say. All right, so here we go. You can see it's not a perfect rectangle. It doesn't need to be. This is just fine for what we're doing. So now all I'm gonna do is just fold it over itself like this. Do that again, and again, and again, until I've got a nice log like this. Now, what I like to do is just pinch off or rub the ends here so it gets a nice shape like this. And then I'll just flip it over and just pinch these seams here so that this is nice and sealed, so that when it's rising up on my baking sheet, it doesn't like flatten out or anything. It just stays in this nice shape. And I'm just basically just pinching where the two folds meet. Okay, easy enough, right? Doesn't have to be perfect. And I'm just gonna move this onto my baking sheet. Now with this next one, it's the same process. Just gonna reflour the surface a little bit. And you can see there's some bubbles here that are forming. Now, I'm just gonna roll this out into another rectangle. I guess the key thing I would make sure is, while we're not looking for a perfect rectangle shape or anything, you just want to make sure that the dough is pretty even as far as distribution on each side, because you don't want one side having like a massive amount of dough and then it being really thin on one side. I mean, it'd be fine if that were to happen because of how forgiving this recipe is, but all right, and then again, I'm just rolling it over on itself like this. Roll the ends like that, and then flip it over, and you can see how there's that crease from the fold. I'm just gonna pinch that off so it seals. Easy peasy. And just, there we go. And then just set this on the baking sheet. All right, so I've got my 2 logs on this baking sheet. I want them to get nice and puffy before I put them in the oven. So what I like to do is these have like 1 hour, maybe 2 hours left. Again, depending upon how cold your house is. I would say mine have like an hour left. I'm gonna preheat my oven to 425 degrees Fahrenheit. I'm just gonna set these near the oven where it's nice and warm. Not in the oven, of course, but just let these finish up in a nice warm place, get nice and puffy, and then right before we bake them, we're just gonna score them. And I'm gonna use a bread lump for that, but you can use a knife too. Doesn't really matter. And we'll walk through that part together. So let's let these sit for 1 to 2 more hours. All right, so we're back, and as you can see, these have gotten quite a bit puffier. It's been about an hour, maybe an hour and 15 minutes for me. They've expanded quite a bit, which is what I was hoping for, and now I'm going to put them in the oven. So the oven's been preheating at 425 degrees Fahrenheit, or about 220 degrees Celsius. Now, we got to make these look pretty, right? So I'm going to sprinkle a little bit of flour on each one, just to give it a nice aesthetic look. And then just rub it in a little bit. Doesn't have to be perfect. You don't even have to do this. This is completely optional. I like to do this. It just looks cool once it's done baking. All right. So next, what we're going to do is take a really sharp knife, or if you have a bread lump from making other types of sourdough products, you can use that too. Again, a sharp knife would work just fine, but we're going to make 3 slices or scores on each loaf. And what this is going to do is just kind of help control if the bread is going to expand, it's going to expand where these scores are instead of out the sides, etc. So it just helps with that. It also looks really cool once it's done baking. All right, so I'm going to bake these for about 25 to 30 minutes. 4 is that they're nice and golden brown, and that they have an internal temp of about 200 degrees. All right, so our bread is finished baking. These took about 25 minutes to reach this color. That's when you'd want to pull them out of your oven. So generally speaking, I'd say between 25 and 30 minutes at 425 degrees Fahrenheit, or about 220 degrees Celsius. These are a fantastic bread to have around. They have a lot of utility. You can use them as a side for your dinner, or to make garlic bread, or sandwiches even, or just to have, some butter and jam on them. So cutting into one to see what it looks like. It's just got a nice soft inside to it. You can see it's just very kind of puffy and soft, and makes for a great bread. So I hope that was a pretty easy process for you. This is a very low maintenance and simple recipe. Not too much work involved, just a couple of stretch and folds or coil folds, and then the easy shaping piece where, we really just kind of loosely shape those into those loaf shapes. So if you like this video, give it a thumbs up and subscribe. Also leave a comment and let me know how it went for you. Happy baking, everyone.